Episode number 4. Ancient Sumer, Cities, Canals, and Soft Evenings. Welcome back to our journey through history. Tonight, we return to Mesopotamia, to the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, but this time, we'll walk more slowly through the streets of the world's first cities. We'll watch the sun set over Sumerian ziggurats, listen to the water flowing through irrigation canals, and sit quietly in temple courtyards as evening descends on ancient Uruk, and Lagash. This is not a story of wars and conquests, though there were some. This is not a tale of great kings, though we'll meet a few. Instead, this is an intimate exploration of daily life in humanity's earliest urban civilization, how people lived, worked, loved, worshipped, and found meaning in the world's first cities. Before we begin, settle in comfortably. Perhaps dim the lights around you. This episode is designed as a peaceful meditation on ancient life, told at the gentle pace of a Sumerian evening, when the day's work was done and families gathered on rooftops to catch the breeze, when temple lamps were lit, and when the stars appeared over the desert horizon just as they had for thousands of years. We'll explore the rhythm of Sumerian days, the morning call to work in the fields, the afternoon heat when people retreated indoors, the evening activities as the city came alive again in cooler hours. We'll visit the temples where priests performed daily rituals, the workshops where craftspeople created beautiful objects, the schools where young boys learned to write cuneiform, and the homes where families lived their ordinary, extraordinary lives. We'll discover how Sumerians understood their world, the gods they believed watched over them, the myths that explained their existence, the values they cherished, and the fears that haunted them. We'll see how they celebrated the seasons, mourned their dead, raised their children, and made sense of the mystery of being human in a sometimes harsh, sometimes beautiful world. Throughout our journey, we'll return to certain themes: water and its sacred importance in a dry land, the relationship between the earthly and divine realms, the tension between urban sophistication and agricultural foundations, and the ways that ordinary people created meaning and beauty in their daily lives despite, or perhaps because of, life's fragility. This episode draws on over a century of archaeological excavation, thousands of translated cuneiform tablets, and the careful scholarship of those who have devoted their lives to understanding ancient Sumer. We'll reference administrative records that tell us what workers ate, literary texts that reveal what people valued, hymns that show how they addressed their gods, and laws that indicate what behaviors they tried to regulate. We'll focus primarily on the early dynastic period, roughly 2900 to 2350 BCE, when Sumerian civilization flourished in independent city-states before being unified under the Akkadian Empire. This gives us a window into Sumerian culture at its most distinctive, before it was absorbed into broader Mesopotamian civilization. If you find peace in this exploration, please consider subscribing and sharing this episode with others who appreciate quiet journeys through ancient worlds. Your support helps us continue creating these contemplative experiences. Now, let us begin. Let us travel to a summer evening in ancient Sumer, perhaps 2600 BCE, as the sun descends toward the western desert, the worst heat of the day passes, and the city of Uruk awakens for its evening activities. Let us walk slowly through streets of mud brick, past temples and workshops, through markets and homes, discovering how people lived in humanity's first urban civilization. Chapter 1. Morning, the day begins by the canal. The Sumerian day began before dawn. In summer, this might be as early as what we would call 4:30 a.m., when the eastern sky first showed pale gray light and the morning star, the planet Venus, sacred to the goddess Inanna, still shone bright above the horizon. In a typical house in Uruk around 2600 BCE, a family would stir as the household head, perhaps a man named Lugalmelem. The king is radiant, a common name, woke and began his morning routine. The house was built of mud brick, as were all structures in southern Mesopotamia where stone was absent. The walls were thick to insulate against heat and cold. The rooms opened onto a central courtyard where much of daily life occurred. The night had been spent sleeping on the roof, where the family laid reed mats and linen blankets. Sumerian summers were brutally hot, with daytime temperatures often exceeding 45 degrees Celsius, 113 Fahrenheit. The brick houses, while cool compared to outside during the day, retained heat at night. So families slept on their flat roofs, where any breeze could provide relief. Only during winter did people sleep indoors, and even then, southern Mesopotamian winters were mild compared to northern regions. Lugalmullum descended the ladder from the roof to the courtyard. His first action was to pour a small libation of water to the household gods, small clay figurines kept in a niche in the courtyard wall. This daily ritual acknowledged the divine forces that protected the household and ensured prosperity. The gods were everywhere in Sumerian life, present in every activity, and maintaining good relations with them required constant attention. His wife, Ninshubur, rose shortly after and began preparing the morning meal. This was simple: barley bread, perhaps some dates, and weak beer. Beer was safer to drink than water, which might be contaminated, and was a dietary staple for Sumerians of all ages, including children. The beer was thick, more like thin porridge than modern beer, and was drunk through reed straws to filter out the barley husks floating in it. Sumerian beer was nutritious, providing calories, vitamins, and minerals that complemented the grain-heavy diet. Water came from the canal that ran through the city, one of many canals that crisscrossed Uruk, bringing water from the Euphrates for drinking, washing, irrigation, and disposal of waste. The canal was the lifeblood of the city, absolutely essential to urban existence in this arid land. Every morning, women and older children walked to the canal with clay jars to collect water for the day's use. This was heavy work. Water is heavy, and the jars might weigh 20 kilograms when full. Yet it had to be done daily, as most households had no large-scale water storage. The canal was also a social space. Women gathering water in the early morning would exchange news, gossip, and information. These informal networks were important in a world without mass communication. News spread person to person, conversation by conversation. Who was getting married? Whose child was sick? What were the priests saying about the harvest? What rumors were circulating about the ruler's latest building project? By the time the sun rose, around what we'd call 5:30 a.m. in summer, the city was awakening. Workers who labored in the temple estates or palace workshops were assembling for assignment. Farmers who owned their own land were heading to their fields. Merchants were opening shop stalls in the market areas. The city was coming alive with the sounds of human activity, voices calling, children playing, animals being driven through streets, craftspeople at their work. The temple complexes dominated Uruk's skyline. The Yana precinct, sacred to Inanna, and the Anu district, dedicated to the sky god, contained massive temple buildings on raised platforms. Even from across the city, one could see the white temple atop its ziggurat, its whitewashed walls catching the morning light. These temples were not just religious centers but economic powerhouses. They owned vast agricultural estates, employed thousands of workers, managed long-distance trade, and produced textiles, pottery, and other goods. Let us follow a different person this morning, a young man named Uruk, age 15, who was in his third year of training as a scribe. Uruk lived with his family in a modest house not far from the Yana temple complex where the scribal school was located. His father was a merchant who traded textiles manufactured in Uruk for copper imported from the mountains to the north. The family was prosperous enough to afford Uruk's education. Scribal training was lengthy and expensive, as it meant the boy wasn't contributing labor to the family for years while he studied. Uruk ate his morning bread and beer quickly and set off for the tablet house, as the scribal school was called. He carried a wooden writing board covered with a thin layer of clay, a reusable surface for practice writing. He also carried a small cloth bag containing a reed stylus, the tool used to press marks into clay, and a small container of water for smoothing clay. The walk through morning Uruk took him past scenes that would have been utterly foreign to people from just 1,000 years earlier. Uruk in 2600 BCE had a population of perhaps 50,000 people, incomprehensibly large by the standards of earlier villages. The city covered over 400 hectares, surrounded by massive walls that the later Epic of Gilgamesh would celebrate. Go up on the wall of Uruk and walk around. Inspect the foundation platform and scrutinize the brickwork. Testify that its bricks are baked bricks, and that the 7 counselors must have laid its foundations. The streets were narrow, winding between mud brick houses that shared walls. There were no streets in the modern sense with names and regular layouts. Instead, there were passages and alleys connecting courtyards and neighborhoods. Navigation was by landmarks. Turn at the shrine of Ningal, go past the beer seller's house, then left at the courtyard with the large tamarisk tree. Uarnancha passed a small neighborhood shrine where an old woman was placing offerings of bread and beer before a statue of a protected deity. These small shrines dotted the city, allowing ordinary people to make offerings and prayers without always going to the great temples. The woman murmured a prayer, perhaps asking for protection for a sick grandchild, or thanksgiving for a son's safe return from a trading journey, or a plea for good fortune in a business deal. He passed workshops already busy with activity. In one courtyard, potters were shaping vessels on wheels that spun as apprentices turned them. In another, weavers sat at looms, their fingers flying as they created the textiles that were Uruk's primary export. The rhythmic thump of the loom beams and the weavers' work songs drifted into the street. In another workshop, metal workers were heating copper over charcoal fires, preparing to cast tools and weapons. The sounds of the city were complex, voices calling in Sumerian, the language of southern Mesopotamia, donkeys braying as they were loaded with goods, the ring of copper hammers, children laughing, an old man singing a work song, the swish of palm fronds being woven into mats, the gurgle of water in a canal. The smells were equally distinct: bread baking in household ovens, beer fermenting in large jars, human and animal waste. Sanitation in ancient cities was always challenging: smoke from cooking fires, the musty smell of mud brick, dates ripening in storerooms, and over everything, the slightly sulfurous smell of the Euphrates waters that sustained the city. Finally, Uarnancha reached the tablet house, attached to the Yana temple complex. The school occupied several rooms around a courtyard where students practiced writing on clay tablets. Already, dozens of young men, the student body was entirely male, were assembled, sitting cross-legged on the brick floor with their clay tablets on their laps. The day's instruction would last until early afternoon, when the heat became unbearable and everyone retreated indoors or to shaded courtyards. The curriculum was rigorous. Students began by learning to form the basic wedge-shaped signs of cuneiform script. They copied lists of signs over and over, developing the muscle memory needed to inscribe clear, legible marks in clay. They memorized lists of gods, cities, animals, plants, professions, and everything else in the Sumerian world, for these lists were how knowledge was organized. They practiced mathematics, multiplication tables, division problems, area calculations, problems involving ratios and proportions. Sumerian mathematics used a base 60 system whose influence persists in our division of hours into 60 minutes and circles into 360 degrees. Students learned to calculate the areas of fields, the volumes of granaries, the interest on loans, and the division of inheritance among brothers. They copied literary texts, hymns to the gods, proverbs offering moral guidance, and myths explaining the world's origins. The Sumerian literary tradition was already ancient by 2600 BCE, with some compositions going back centuries. Students copied these texts partly to learn literature and religion, but also to practice writing and to absorb the values and worldview these texts expressed. The headmaster of the school, called the Ummiyah or father of the tablet house, was a stern man who expected perfection. Mistakes in writing were not tolerated. A student who inscribed a sign incorrectly might have his tablet broken and be required to start over. Physical punishment was common. The Sumerians believed that the ear is on the back, meaning that students learned better when beaten. Later Sumerian texts describe students being caned for arriving late, for poor work, for speaking out of turn, or for insufficient respect to teachers. Yet despite the harsh discipline, there was also camaraderie among students. They shared the hardship of long hours of practice, the tedium of copying endless lists, and the pride of mastering difficult skills. They competed to see who could write most beautifully, calculate most quickly, or recite longest passages from memory. They formed friendships that might last throughout their lives, networks that would be valuable when they entered professional life as scribes in temple or palace administration. Uruk spent his morning practicing a multiplication table, copying him to Inanna, and working through a mathematical problem involving the division of a field among 3 brothers according to their birth order. The problem was both a mathematical exercise and a lesson in Sumerian social values. The eldest brother received a double share, reflecting his responsibility to care for parents in old age and maintain the family estate. As midday approached and the heat intensified, the headmaster dismissed the students until evening, when they would return for more instruction. Uruk carefully stored his practice tablet. The clay would be recycled, smoothed for reuse tomorrow, and walked home through streets now quieter as people retreated from the brutal noon sun. The morning in ancient Sumer was a time of activity, of work begun, of rituals performed, of the city awakening to face another day under the fierce Mesopotamian sun. As Uruk walked home, the morning star had long since faded from the sky, invisible now in daylight but still present, still watching over the city, still sacred to Inanna, who was believed to walk through Uruk streets, unseen but present, a goddess among her people. Chapter 2. Afternoon, heat and rest in the city. By midday in summer, Uruk had become nearly unbearable. The sun blazed from a cloudless sky, beating down on mud brick walls and narrow streets. The temperature soared to 45 or 50 degrees Celsius. The light was blinding, reflecting off whitewashed temple walls and the water in canals. Even animals sought shade, and the streets that had bustled with activity in the morning now lay nearly empty. This was the time when Sumerians retreated indoors or to shaded courtyards. The thick mud brick walls of houses, which had absorbed coolness from the night, now provided insulation against the heat. Families gathered in interior rooms or in courtyards shaded by reed awnings. This was a time for rest, for the midday meal, for escaping the sun's intensity. Let us visit a different household for the afternoon, that of Baranamtara, a widow who managed her late husband's estate with the help of her adult sons. Baranamtara was unusually fortunate. Her husband had been a successful merchant who had accumulated significant property before his death 10 years earlier. She now owned agricultural land, date palm groves, and a share in a trading partnership that sent caravans north to Syria and east to Iran. Sumerian women could own and manage property, engage in business, and bring lawsuits in court. While society was patriarchal, men held most positions of power. Women were expected to be under male authority, fathers, husbands, brothers, or sons, and laws treated men and women differently. Women were not entirely without legal standing or economic agency. Wealthy women, particularly widows who inherited property, could wield considerable influence. Baranamtara's house was larger than average, reflecting her wealth. It was built around 2 courtyards, a front courtyard where business was conducted and guests received, and a back courtyard where the family's private life occurred. The house had rooms for storage, sleeping, food preparation, and receiving guests. One room contained the household shrine with figurines of protective deities and ancestor statues. The afternoon meal was the main meal of the day, prepared during the morning and eaten when people returned from work. The food was simple but filling. The basis of every meal was barley, either as bread or porridge. Barley bread was the staff of life. The Sumerians had dozens of words for different types of bread, reflecting its central importance. The bread was thick, chewy, and sustaining, made from coarsely ground barley flour, water, and salt, baked in domed ovens. Along with bread, the meal might include onions and garlic, which grew well in irrigated fields and added flavor to the monotonous grain diet. Sumerians consumed vast quantities of onions. Administrative texts from temples record onions distributed to workers in amounts that would seem excessive today. Legumes, lentils, chickpeas, and beans provided protein and complemented the grain-heavy diet. These were often cooked into thick stews or porridges. Dates, which grew abundantly in southern Mesopotamia on date palm trees that thrived in the heat. Dates were eaten fresh in season and dried for year-round consumption. They provided essential sweetness. There was no sugar cane or honeybees in ancient Sumer, calories, and nutrients. Date syrup, made by boiling dates, was used as a sweetener and condiment. Vegetables, leeks, cucumbers, turnips, and various greens when available. Gardens attached to houses or on the city outskirts provided fresh vegetables in season. Fish from the Euphrates and from marshes to the south. Fish was an important source of protein, often salted and dried for preservation. Dried fish appears constantly in administrative texts recording rations. Meat was relatively rare for ordinary families, consumed mainly during festivals or special occasions. Sheep and goats were too valuable alive, providing wool, milk, and labor, to be slaughtered frequently. But festivals might feature roasted mutton, and the wealthy ate meat more regularly. Beer, of course, accompanied every meal. Sumerian beer came in several grades, the finest for temple offerings and elite consumption, and weaker varieties for ordinary people and workers. The beer provided not just refreshment but significant calories and nutrition. Milk and dairy products appeared in wealthier households. Sheep and goat milk was consumed fresh or processed into cheese and butter. Milk spoiled quickly in the heat, so most dairy was consumed soon after milking or preserved as cheese. Notably absent from the Sumerian diet were many foods we consider staples: no chickens, domesticated chickens hadn't yet reached Mesopotamia, no rice, no tomatoes or potatoes, New World crops unknown in ancient Mesopotamia, no citrus fruits, which came from East Asia, and very little beef. Cattle were draft animals, too valuable to eat regularly. Baranamtara's household ate well by Sumerian standards. They had meat more frequently than poor families, finer bread made from wheat rather than barley. Wheat was more prestigious but harder to grow, and luxuries like imported wine from Syria. Yet even in wealthy households, the basic diet remained bread, beer, onions, dates, and fish. After eating, the household rested. This was not laziness but practical necessity. Working during the peak heat invited heatstroke and exhaustion. Better to rest through the afternoon and resume activity when evening brought cooler temperatures. People napped, told stories, played board games, or simply sat in shaded courtyards, waiting for the heat to pass. Baranamtara spent her afternoon reviewing accounts with her eldest son. Clay tablets recorded transactions, grain delivered to the warehouse, dates harvested from their palm groves, textiles purchased for trade, wages owed to laborers, taxes due to the temple and palace. Managing an estate required literacy and numeracy, hence the importance of scribal education. The tablets were inscribed with cuneiform script, each wedge-shaped mark pressed into soft clay with a reed stylus. Once inscribed, tablets might be dried in the sun or baked in an oven to make them permanent. Important documents, contracts, legal settlements, land sales, were baked and stored carefully. Less important records, daily accounts, receipts for small transactions, might be kept briefly then recycled, the clay smoothed and reused. Looking at these tablets, we can glimpse the everyday economic life of ancient Sumer. One tablet records 5 sheep received from Uruk, 3 sheep delivered to the temple of Ningal, 2 sheep remaining. Another, barley, 300 sila. From the field of Enlilbani. Delivered to the warehouse. Witnessed by Lugalingar. A third, contract, Uarningal rents field measuring 3 eku from Baranamtara for 1 year. Rent, 1,200 sila of barley, to be delivered after harvest. Witnessed by Nanakalig, Aradnana, and Uarsin. These mundane records tell us how Sumerian economy functioned. Land was rented, crops were sold, goods were exchanged, labor was hired, and everything was recorded in writing. The invention of writing had made possible a level of economic complexity unprecedented in human history. Without written records, how could merchants track goods shipped to distant cities? How could landlords remember which tenants owed which rents? How could temples manage thousands of workers and vast estates? Writing was the infrastructure of urban civilization. While the family rested indoors, the city outside had not entirely ceased activity. The temples continued their functions. The gods required constant attention regardless of heat. In the Inanna precinct, priests performed afternoon rituals before the statue of Inanna. The goddess was believed to inhabit her statue, which stood in the temple's inner sanctum. She needed to be fed, clothed, entertained, and honored. The afternoon offering involved presenting fine foods to the goddess: bread made from the finest wheat flour, beer of the highest quality, dates, honey, rare and expensive, imported from the north, roasted lamb, and fresh vegetables. These foods were arranged on offering tables before the statue while priests chanted hymns praising Inanna's beauty, power, and generosity. After the ritual, the food was redistributed. The gods didn't actually eat the offerings, though the Sumerians believed the divine essence was consumed, so the physical food was shared among the temple staff. This redistribution function was important. Temples received vast quantities of offerings from worshippers and taxes from their agricultural estates, and this wealth was redistributed through rations to priests, scribes, craftspeople, and laborers who worked for the temple. Temples functioned as economic centers, collecting agricultural surplus and using it to support specialists who didn't farm. In the artisan quarter, some craftspeople continued working despite the heat. Metal workers, whose furnaces made their workshops even hotter, labored through the afternoon while others rested. The copper had to be worked while hot, the casting molds prepared, the finished objects shaped and polished. A team of metal workers was preparing weapons, copper axes and spearheads, for the palace. The ruler, called Lugal, literally big man, maintained a military force for defense and for disputes with neighboring cities. Inter-city conflict was a recurring feature of Sumerian life. City-states competed for water rights, agricultural land, and trade routes. The boundaries between territories were often disputed. A field that Lagash claimed might be asserted as Umma's territory. Water diverted by an upstream city might be desperately needed downstream. These disputes could simmer for generations, occasionally erupting into armed conflict. Yet despite the potential for violence, there was also cooperation. The city-states shared language, culture, and religion. They traded with each other, their merchants traveling between cities. Scribes trained in one city might work in another. Religious festivals brought pilgrims from across Sumer to major temples. Intermarriage between elite families created kinship ties across cities. The Sumerians saw themselves as part of a common civilization even as their cities competed politically. As the afternoon wore on, the worst heat began to pass. By what we would call 4 p.m., the sun had moved lower in the western sky. The temperature was still hot, perhaps 40 degrees, but the unbearable peak had passed. People began to emerge from their houses, resuming activities suspended during midday. Workers returned to fields and workshops. Markets reopened for afternoon trading. The canals, quiet during midday, came alive with people bathing, doing laundry, and drawing water. Children who had been forced to stay indoors during the peak heat now spilled into streets and courtyards, playing games, racing, throwing balls made of rags, playing a board game similar to backgammon, or swimming in canals, though parents worried about dangers in the water, currents, waterborne diseases, and occasionally crocodiles that had wandered up from the southern marshes. The rhythm of Sumerian life was dictated by heat and light. The intense summer sun made midday unbearable, forcing a daily siesta. But as afternoon faded toward evening, the city awakened again, ready for the cooler hours when life could be lived comfortably outdoors. Let us move toward evening now, as the sun descends toward the western desert, as the heat finally breaks, and as the city of Uruk prepares for the best part of the day, when work is done, when families gather, and when the city truly comes alive under the softening light. Chapter 3. Evening, the city comes alive. The Sumerian evening began around what we would call 5 o'clock or 6 p.m., when the sun hung low in the western sky, its fierce heat finally diminishing. This was the time Sumerians loved most, when the oppressive day yielded to comfortable evening, when the city came alive with social activity, and when the beauty of the Mesopotamian sky revealed itself. The transformation was remarkable. Streets that had been nearly empty at midday now filled with people. The evening air, though still warm, felt almost cool compared to the afternoon inferno. A breeze often picked up as the land cooled, carrying the scent of water from the canals, the smell of evening meals cooking, and the sounds of a city relaxing after the day's labor. Families gathered on their rooftops, the social space of Sumerian cities. Roofs in southern Mesopotamia were flat, constructed of palm logs covered with reed mats and packed earth. They were strong enough to walk on and became outdoor rooms where families spent much of their time. On summer evenings, roofs were where life happened. Let us visit the roof of Nanakalik, a farmer who owned a modest plot of land outside Uruk's walls. His household consisted of himself, his wife Jean Ninlil, their 3 children, ages 7, 5, and 2, and his elderly mother. They climbed the ladder to their roof as the sun touched the horizon. Jean Ninlil had prepared the evening meal, a lighter affair than the afternoon meal, perhaps just bread, onions, dates, and beer. The family sat in a circle on reed mats, eating and talking. The children, energetic after being cooped up during the heat, played tag along the roof's edge while their parents called warnings to be careful. From the roof, the family could see across much of their neighborhood. Other families were similarly gathered on their roofs. Voices drifted through the evening air, conversations, laughter, a mother singing to a baby, someone telling a story, an argument between neighbors about a borrowed tool not returned. The rooftops were not private spaces but part of the city's social fabric. To the south, the great temple precincts rose above the city, their whitewashed walls catching the evening light. The ziggurat, the stepped platform on which the white temple stood, was particularly impressive, dominating the skyline. Even from a distance, one could see small figures moving on the temple platforms, priests performing evening rituals. To the north and west, beyond the city walls, stretched the agricultural landscape that fed Uruk. Fields of barley and wheat, now mostly harvested, appeared as golden-brown expanses. Date palm groves stood in orderly rows. And everywhere, the silver lines of canals caught the light, a geometric network of water crisscrossing the landscape. The sky itself was spectacular. Mesopotamian sunsets were often dramatic, the western sky turning orange, then pink, then deep red as the sun descended. The eastern sky darkened from blue to purple to indigo. And then, as the sun finally set and twilight deepened, the stars began to appear. The Sumerians were careful observers of the heavens. Priests charted the movements of stars, planets, and the moon. They knew which stars rose at which seasons, which constellations appeared in which months, and how the moon waxed and waned through its monthly cycle. The sky was not merely beautiful but meaningful. Celestial events were believed to communicate divine will. An unusual astronomical occurrence, a lunar eclipse, a planetary conjunction, a bright comet, might be interpreted as an omen requiring ritual response. Venus, the planet associated with Inanna, was particularly important. As the evening star, Venus appeared in the western sky after sunset, bright and beautiful. As the morning star, the same planet appeared in the eastern sky before dawn. The Sumerians didn't initially realize these were the same celestial body, but they associated both with Inanna, the goddess of love and war, who embodied duality and transformation. As twilight deepened, lights began to appear across the city. Oil lamps, simple clay vessels filled with sesame oil with a wick of twisted flax, were lit in households and temples. These lamps provided only modest light, enough to see within a room but not to read or do fine work. Most evening activities didn't require bright light: eating, talking, playing music, telling stories, preparing for sleep. In the temple precincts, more elaborate lighting appeared. Torches on the temple platforms, larger oil lamps, and even bonfires for major festivals created dramatic illumination. The temples were meant to be beautiful and impressive, demonstrating the god's power and the community's devotion. Evening rituals often incorporated fire and light, perhaps representing the divine presence or the sacred boundary between human and divine realms. Music drifted through the evening air. The Sumerians loved music, which played important roles in both religious and secular life. Temple rituals included musicians who played during offerings and hymns. Festivals featured elaborate musical performances. And ordinary people made music for entertainment and celebration. Sumerian instruments included the lyre, a stringed instrument similar to a small harp, was particularly important. Lyres found in the royal cemetery at Uruk, dating to around 2600 to 2450 BCE, are masterpieces of craftsmanship, decorated with gold, lapis lazuli, and elaborate inlays showing mythological scenes. These instruments produced sweet, resonant tones suitable for accompanying songs. The harp, larger than the lyre, was played in temples and palaces. Harps might have 10 or more strings and required considerable skill to play. Reed flutes and pipes, similar to modern recorders, produced melodic lines. Shepherds often played flutes while tending flocks, and flute music accompanied dances and celebrations. Drums of various sizes provided rhythm. Small hand drums could be played by individuals, while larger drums required drummers to beat them with sticks. Drums were important in religious processions and military contexts. Rattles, bells, and cymbals added percussive elements. Temple rituals often included elaborate soundscapes with multiple instruments creating complex rhythms. The human voice, of course, was the most important instrument. Sumerians sang hymns, work songs, lullabies, love songs, and laments. Professional singers performed in temples, their voices trained to project and sustain long melodic lines. On this particular evening, somewhere in the neighborhood, a man was playing a lyre on his rooftop, improvising a melody. The sound carried through the evening air, adding to the ambient soundscape of the city: voices, children playing, animals settling for the night, the distant rush of water in canals. Storytelling was a major evening activity. Before writing enabled the preservation of literature, stories were transmitted orally, passed from generation to generation through telling and retelling. Even after writing developed, oral storytelling remained important. Most people were illiterate, and stories were meant to be heard, not read silently. Nana Kalig's elderly mother was a gifted storyteller, and the children begged her to tell a tale. She began a story they had heard many times but never tired of, the tale of how the gods created humans. Long ago, she began, her voice taking on the rhythmic cadence of traditional storytelling. Before humans walked the earth, the gods had to do all the work themselves. They had to dig canals, tend fields, and carry water. The gods grew tired of this labor. They complained to Enlil, the king of the gods. Enlil and the other great gods and the sky, Enki, the wise, and Ninmah, the mother goddess, met in council. How could they solve this problem? Finally, clever Enki proposed a solution. They would create humans to do the work for the gods. Ninmah took clay from the Apsu, the sweet waters beneath the earth. Enki taught her the incantations. And from clay and divine spittle, the first humans were formed. The gods gave breath to the clay, and humans came alive. The gods rejoiced. Now humans would do the work, digging canals, planting fields, making offerings. The gods could rest and enjoy the fruits of human labor. This is why we exist, to serve the gods through our work, to maintain the temples, to ensure the cosmic order continues. This creation myth expressed the Sumerian worldview. Humans were not the center of existence but servants of the gods, created for divine convenience. This might sound grim to modern ears, but the Sumerians didn't see it as oppressive. The relationship was reciprocal. Humans served gods, but gods in return provided order, fertility, protection, and meaning. The temple offerings that humans made sustained the gods, who in turn sustained the cosmos. Everyone had their place in a grand cosmic order. As the mother told her story, neighboring families on their roofs listened too. Stories were semi-public performances, shared across the rooftop community. When she finished, someone from another roof called out praise for the telling, and another person began a different story, this one about Gilgamesh, the legendary king of Uruk. The Gilgamesh traditions were already ancient by 2600 BCE, and would continue to be told and elaborated for thousands of years. The earliest Sumerian poems about Gilgamesh described him as a superhuman hero who performed great deeds, building the walls of Uruk, journeying to the cedar forest, defeating monsters. Later versions would add the friendship with Enkidu, the quest for immortality, and the profound exploration of mortality that makes the Epic of Gilgamesh one of humanity's greatest literary achievements. As the storytelling continued, merchants and travelers gathered in beer houses throughout the city. Beer houses were important social institutions, places where people gathered to drink, socialize, conduct business, and exchange news. They were usually run by women, and Sumerian law codes contain numerous regulations about beer house operations. Proper measures must be used, prices must be fair, disorderly behavior must be controlled. In one such establishment, travelers who had arrived that day from Ur, a major city to the southeast, were sharing news while locals listened eagerly. What was happening in other cities? Had Ur's ruler begun the temple renovation project rumored for months? What were grain prices like there? Were there merchants looking for trading partners? Any marriages or alliances between important families? Any conflicts brewing? This informal information network was crucial in a world without mass communication. News traveled person to person, carried by merchants, travelers, and messengers. A major event in one city, a festival, a royal death, a military conflict, might take weeks to become widely known across Sumer. But gradually, through conversations in beer houses, in markets, on trading journeys, information spread, and the Sumerian world maintained its cultural and economic connections. The evening also brought religious activities. Many families made evening offerings at household shrines, pouring libations and burning incense to protected deities. Some went to neighborhood temples to make offerings or seek divine guidance. The great temples conducted evening rituals, feeding the gods their evening meal, singing hymns, burning incense, and closing the sanctuary doors for the night. For the Sumerians, the divine was not distant but intimately involved in daily life. Every activity had its patron deity. Farmers prayed to Enlil and Ninurta for good harvests. Merchants honored Ninlil for successful journeys. Scribes made offerings to Nisaba, goddess of writing. Women in childbirth invoked Nintur, the birth goddess. The sick sought healing from Ninasina. The gods were everywhere, watching everything, and maintaining good relations with them required constant attention. As full darkness fell, around 8 p.m. in summer, the city quieted. The heat of the day had finally dissipated. The temperature, which had soared above 45 degrees at midday, might now be only 30 degrees, almost comfortable. A breeze often picked up in the evening, carrying cooler air from the desert or the marshes. Families on rooftops began preparing for sleep. Reed mats were unrolled, linen blankets spread. Parents settled restless children. The elderly found comfortable positions for aching joints. The sounds of the city diminished to a gentle murmur, quiet conversations, a baby crying, dogs barking, the rustle of palm fronds, and always, the eternal sound of water moving through canals. Above, the night sky revealed itself in full glory. In an age without light pollution, the stars were spectacularly bright. The Milky Way stretched across the sky, a river of light. Constellations the Sumerians had identified and named glittered overhead. The moon, if present, cast enough light to see across rooftops and into the streets below. Nanakaleg's family, like households across Uruk, lay on their roof looking up at the stars. The grandmother pointed out constellations, teaching the children their names and the stories associated with them. The children's eyes grew heavy as her voice droned on softly. One by one, they fell asleep. The parents lay awake a while longer, talking quietly about the day, the harvest that needed to be completed soon, a daughter old enough that marriage arrangements should begin, a debt owed to a neighbor that should be repaid, plans for the next day. The ordinary concerns of ordinary people, repeated in thousands of households across the city, across Sumer, and indeed across all human societies regardless of time or place. Eventually, they too fell silent. The city slept, its tens of thousands of inhabitants spread across hundreds of hectares, their lives briefly suspended in sleep, their dreams unknown and unknowable to us across the gulf of millennia. But the city itself didn't entirely sleep. Temple guards remained alert. Night watchmen patrolled to prevent theft and maintain order. In the temple sanctuaries, oil lamps burned through the night before the divine statues. The gods never slept, and their presence required constant honor. In the palace, guards stood watch over the ruler and the wealth stored in royal treasuries. And beyond the city walls, the canals continued to flow, carrying life-giving water from the Euphrates through the network of channels that humans had dug over centuries, the water moving through the darkness toward distant fields where it would nourish next season's crops, the cycle continuing as it had for thousands of years, as it would for thousands more, the great rhythm of water and earth and human labor that made civilization possible in this arid land. Chapter 4. Water, the Sacred Flow. To understand Sumer, one must understand water. In this arid land where rain was insufficient for agriculture, where summer heat was extreme, where the landscape was naturally desert, water was literally life. Every drop that sustained the city, every morsel of food eaten, every textile woven, every moment of life itself ultimately depended on water flowing from the mountains hundreds of kilometers away down two rivers into the southern Mesopotamian plain. The Tigris and Euphrates were not just geographical features but the very foundations of existence. Without them, southern Mesopotamia would have been uninhabitable desert. With them, it became one of the most productive agricultural regions in the ancient world, capable of supporting cities of tens of thousands of people. The river's behavior shaped the calendar and rhythm of life. Spring brought the flood season, when snowmelt from the mountains of eastern Turkey and western Iran dramatically increased river flow. In April and May, the rivers would swell, sometimes overflowing their banks, inundating low-lying areas. This flooding was both blessing and danger. The danger was real. Uncontrolled flooding could destroy settlements, drown people and animals, wash away fields, and breach canals and levees. Sumerian mythology preserves memories of catastrophic floods. The story of Ziusidra, later called Utnapishtim in Akkadian texts, and the probable model for the biblical Noah, tells of a great flood sent by the gods to destroy humanity. Only Ziusidra, warned by the god Enki, built a boat and survived. After the flood subsided, the gods granted him immortality and settled him at the mouth of the rivers in the east. This myth likely reflects actual experiences of devastating floods that destroyed settlements and killed populations. Yet flooding was also essential. The floodwaters carried rich silt from the mountains, depositing fertile sediment across the plain. This annual renewal of soil fertility was crucial for maintaining agricultural productivity. Unlike rain-fed agriculture where nutrients might be depleted over time, the annual floods naturally replenished the soil. The challenge was to harness the flood's benefits while controlling their dangers. This required extensive hydraulic engineering. The Sumerians developed increasingly sophisticated systems for managing water. Levees were built along river channels to prevent uncontrolled flooding. These earthen embankments, sometimes several meters high, channeled floodwaters while protecting settlements and fields. Levee construction and maintenance required coordinated labor, thousands of workers moving earth, building and repairing banks, and monitoring them during flood season. Canals diverted water from the rivers to distant fields. Major canals might stretch for kilometers, carefully graded to ensure water flowed steadily without eroding the canal bed. These main canals branched into smaller distribution channels that delivered water to individual fields. The network of canals crisscrossing southern Mesopotamia was one of the ancient world's great engineering achievements. Reservoirs and basins stored water for use during dry seasons. Areas could be flooded intentionally during high water and the water retained for later use. This required controlling water flow into and out of storage basins through gates and channels. Drainage systems were essential for preventing waterlogging and salinization. When irrigation water evaporates, it leaves behind dissolved salts. Over time, these salts accumulate in soil, eventually reaching concentrations that kill plants. Effective drainage flushes salts away, maintaining soil productivity. The Sumerians understood this problem and built drainage canals alongside irrigation canals. Measuring devices and techniques allowed monitoring of water levels and flow rates. Understanding how much water was available, how fast it was flowing, and how it should be distributed required careful measurement and record-keeping. Scribes kept tablets recording water allocations, canal maintenance schedules, and disputes over water rights. This hydraulic infrastructure required constant maintenance. Canals filled with silt and had to be dredged regularly. Levees eroded and needed repair. Gates and control structures required monitoring and adjustment. Water distribution had to be managed daily, with some fields receiving water while others were closed off. All this demanded organization, labor, and authority. Who managed the water? Initially, probably local communities coordinated their own irrigation. A village would collectively dig and maintain canals serving their fields, allocate water among households, and resolve disputes through elders or councils. But as settlements grew into cities with extensive territories, more complex administrative structures emerged. Temples played major roles in water management. Temple estates owned vast agricultural lands requiring irrigation. Temples had the administrative capacity, literate scribes, organizational structures, ability to mobilize labor to manage large irrigation systems. The earliest writing includes tablets recording canal maintenance, water allocations, and workers employed in hydraulic projects. The rulers, Lugals and Anses, also organized hydraulic works. Royal inscriptions frequently mention canal digging and maintenance as major achievements. A ruler who ensured good irrigation and flood control could legitimately claim to have brought prosperity to the land. Hammurabi of Babylon, centuries after the Sumerian period, would still boast of digging the canal called Hammurabi, the abundance of the people, which brought copious waters to the lands of Sumer and Akkad. Water allocation was a constant source of conflict. Cities located upstream on rivers or canals could divert water before it reached downstream cities. The boundary between territories was often unclear, leading to disputes over which city controlled which waterworks. One of the longest-running conflicts in Sumerian history was between Lagash and Umma over the Guadina region and its canals. Inscriptions from Lagash rulers repeatedly claimed that Umma diverted water illegally, damaged Lagash's canals, and violated boundaries. The conflict simmered for generations, occasionally erupting into warfare. Beyond its practical importance, water held profound religious significance. The Euphrates and Tigris were considered divine or divinely created. The god Enki, also called Ea, was the lord of the Apsu, the sweet waters beneath the earth that fed springs, rivers, and wells. Enki was a beneficent deity who loved humanity, gave them wisdom and civilization, and protected them from other gods' wrath. His association with water reflected water's life-giving properties. Water rituals were central to Sumerian religion. Libations, pouring water offerings to gods, were daily religious acts performed by priests and ordinary people alike. Ritual purification involved washing with water to remove spiritual impurity. Temple complexes included sacred pools or basins for ritual purposes. Water from the Euphrates was believed to have sacred properties, used in ceremonies and rituals. The marshes of southern Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and Euphrates approached the Persian Gulf and spread into vast wetlands, were considered especially sacred. These marshes were mysterious, liminal spaces between land and water, between human settlement and wild nature. They were associated with primordial creation. In Sumerian mythology, the marshes represented the original state from which ordered world emerged. The marsh reeds were important economically, used for mats, baskets, building materials, and boats, but also religiously significant. Water also connected the human and divine realms in Sumerian cosmology. The gods lived in temples, but these temples were understood as earthly representations of divine dwellings that existed in the heavens and in the Apsu beneath the earth. Ritual offerings fed the gods, maintaining the relationship between humans and divine. And this relationship was often described using water metaphors. The gods' blessings flowed like water to humanity, divine favor was like irrigation enriching the land, and divine wrath was like uncontrolled flood destroying everything. On a more mundane but equally important level, water shaped daily life in countless ways. Morning water gathering was an essential chore. Drinking water came from canals, ideally drawn from flowing water rather than stagnant pools. People knew that flowing water was safer, standing water could cause sickness. Yet even flowing canal water carried risks, as sewage and waste washed into waterways. Washing of bodies, clothing, dishes, and tools occurred at canals or in courtyards using water drawn from canals. Bathing was regular practice, both for cleanliness and for ritual purity. Clothes were washed by beating them against stones at the canal edge, then spreading them to dry. Dishes were scrubbed with sand and water. Personal cleanliness was valued, and temple personnel had to maintain ritual purity through regular washing. Water powered some industrial processes. Mills for grinding grain used water power in later periods, though whether this technology existed in early dynastic Sumer is uncertain. Brickmaking required vast amounts of water mixed with clay and straw. Textile production used water for washing wool, dyeing cloth, and other processes. Metallurgy needed water for cooling metal and for various chemical processes. The sound of water was omnipresent in Sumerian cities. The gurgle of canals, the splash of water being drawn, the rush of water diverted into fields during irrigation, the sound of children swimming and playing in canals, the swish of water being poured for washing or ritual libations, these sounds would have been part of the constant soundscape of Sumerian life. At night, lying on rooftops, families could hear the water flowing through nearby canals. This sound was comforting, it meant life, prosperity, continuity. As long as the water flowed, the city would endure. The crops would grow. Life would continue. The eternal flow of water from the distant mountains through the cities and fields and on to the sea was like the flow of time itself, inevitable, unstoppable, the great constant of existence in the land between the rivers. Chapter 5. The Gods Walk Among Us. Religion permeated every aspect of Sumerian life. This was not a culture where religion was a separate category distinct from economics, politics, or daily routine. Rather, the divine and human realms were deeply intertwined, with gods constantly involved in human affairs and humans constantly obligated to honor and serve the gods. The Sumerian pantheon was large and complex. Hundreds of deities existed, ranging from great cosmic gods to local protective spirits. The gods were anthropomorphic, they looked like humans, though taller and more beautiful, and shining with divine radiance. They had personalities, preferences, emotions, and relationships much like humans. They could be generous or cruel, wise or capricious, nurturing or destructive. At the top of the pantheon were the great gods. And, also called Anu and Akkadian, the sky god, was the nominal king of the gods. He embodied authority in cosmic order but played a limited active role in myths. And was somewhat distant, residing in the highest heaven, occasionally consulted but rarely directly involved in earthly events. Enlil, lord of wind and storms, was the executive king of the gods. While it might be titular head, Enlil made things happen. His word was law among the gods, what Enlil decreed came to pass. His temple at Nippur was the most important religious center in all Sumer, even though Nippur was never a major political power. Every Sumerian city acknowledged Enlil's supremacy, and major political events required legitimation at his temple. Enki, called Ea in Akkadian, god of fresh water and wisdom, was the clever, creative deity who loved humanity. He lived in the Apsu, the fresh waters beneath the earth, and was patron of magic, crafts, and intellectual pursuits. Myths portrayed Enki as friendly to humans, often protecting them from other gods' wrath. He taught humanity the arts of civilization, agriculture, writing, mathematics, crafts. The cultural hero who brought knowledge to humans was associated with Enki. Ninhursag, also called Ninmah, Nintu, and other names, the mother goddess, was associated with birth, fertility, and the wild animals of the steppe. She helped create humans and was invoked during childbirth. Her various names reflected different aspects of the great goddess figure. Below these great cosmic deities were gods associated with specific domains. Inanna, Ishtar in Akkadian, goddess of love and war, was one of the most important and complex deities. She was Uruk's patron goddess, and her temple precinct, the Iana, dominated the city. Inanna embodied paradoxes. She was goddess of both love and war, of fertility and destruction, of order and chaos. She could bestow love or inflict violence, ensure good harvests or bring famine. Hymns praised her beauty, sexuality, and terrifying power. Myths portrayed her as ambitious, passionate, and sometimes cruel. Utu, Shamash in Akkadian, the sun god, was associated with justice and truth. As the sun sees everything from above, Utu knew all secrets and punished wrongdoing. He was invoked in oaths and legal proceedings. To swear by Utu was to call on the god who sees all to witness your truth and punish you if you lied. Nana, Sin in Akkadian, the moon god, was particularly important in Ur, where his massive ziggurat temple still stands today. The moon's regular cycles made Nana especially significant for the calendar and for marking time. Ningal, Nana's wife, was also worshipped at Ur and other cities. Nergal, god of plague and the underworld, was feared but also invoked for protection. He represented the destructive forces that could devastate communities: epidemic disease, enemy invasion, famine. Ereshkigal, queen of the underworld, ruled the realm of the dead. The underworld in Sumerian belief was not a place of punishment or reward based on morality but simply the destination of all humans after death, a dark, dusty realm where shades of the dead existed in dreary eternity. Beyond these major deities were countless lesser gods, gods of specific crafts: Nisaba for writing and grain, Ninurta for agriculture and war, Nanchi for fish and fishing, protective deities associated with households or neighborhoods, demons and monsters, and divine servants who carried out the great god's commands. Each city had its patron deity whose main temple dominated the urban center. Uruk belonged to Inanna and in Ur to Nana. Lagash to Ningirsu, a form of Ninurta. Eridu to Enki. The city was literally the god's property. The god owned the city, its land, and its people. The human ruler was the god's representative, managing divine property on the deity's behalf. Temples were not places for congregational worship as in later religions. They were the god's house, literally, the dwelling where the deity lived. The inner sanctum contained the god's statue, and this statue was treated as if the god physically inhabited it. The statue was dressed in fine clothes, adorned with jewelry, given food and drink, entertained with music, and protected from anything impure or displeasing. Daily temple ritual involved caring for the god. Priests rose before dawn to open the sanctuary doors, awakening the deity. They washed the statue, dressed it in clean clothes, and presented the morning meal: bread, beer, meat, fruits, and other foods arranged on offering tables. Musicians played and singers chanted hymns praising the god. Incense was burned, creating pleasant scents. Throughout the day, additional offerings and rituals occurred. In the evening, the god was given the evening meal, and at nightfall, the sanctuary was closed, allowing the god to sleep. This elaborate ritual had theological significance. The gods needed humans just as humans needed gods. Humans provided the labor, offerings, and worship that sustained the gods, while gods provided cosmic order, fertility, protection, and meaning. This was a reciprocal relationship. Humans served gods, but gods were obligated in return to maintain the world and care for their human servants. When things went wrong, crops failed, cities were conquered, plagues struck, the Sumerians interpreted this as divine displeasure. The gods were angry, and humans had to determine why and make amends. Omens and divination were crucial for understanding divine will. Priests specialized in interpreting signs, the patterns of oil poured on water, the shapes of animal livers sacrificed to gods, the movements of celestial bodies, unusual events like eclipses or earthquakes, the behavior of animals, and even dreams. Ordinary people interacted with the divine in many ways. They made offerings at household shrines to protected deities. They visited neighborhood temples to pray and leave small offerings. They participated in religious festivals that marked the agricultural calendar and honored the gods. They swore oaths by the gods, invoking divine witness and punishment for oath-breaking. They consulted diviners when making important decisions. Should I undertake this trade journey? Is this a good match for my daughter? Will I recover from this illness? Personal piety was important. Individuals had personal gods, often family deities passed down through generations, who acted as advocates before the great gods. When praying, a Sumerian might first appeal to their personal god to intercede with higher powers on their behalf. This created a hierarchy of divine advocacy. A common person couldn't simply approach Enlil directly but might ask their personal god to ask the city god to ask Enlil. Votive statues found in temples provide touching evidence of personal devotion. These small statues, often showing figures with large, staring eyes and hands clasped in prayer, were left in temples as permanent representations of worshippers. The inscription might read, "For the life of, name, this statue was dedicated to, deity." The statue would pray perpetually before the god, maintaining the worshipper's presence even when they were absent. Religious festivals punctuated the year, providing community celebration and reinforcing cosmic order. The most important festival was the New Year celebration, which in Sumer occurred around the autumn equinox. This festival involved elaborate rituals reenacting creation myths, affirming the king's legitimacy, renewing cosmic order, and celebrating the agricultural cycle's renewal. Festivals included processions where divine statues were carried through the city, allowing ordinary people to see the gods. There were ritual dramas enacting myths, perhaps the death and resurrection of the vegetation god, or Inanna's descent to the underworld, or the triumph of order over chaos. There was feasting with meat distributed to participants. Major festivals were rare opportunities for ordinary people to eat meat. There was music, dancing, and revelry. And there were ritual sexual practices associated with Inanna's cult, though scholarly debate continues about the nature and extent of these practices. Religion also structured the calendar. The Sumerian calendar was lunar, with months beginning at the new moon. Month names were often derived from agricultural activities or religious festivals: month of eating barley, month of the festival of the goddess Inanna, and so on. Different cities sometimes used different month names, though the basic structure was similar across Sumer. Since 12 lunar months, approximately 354 days, fall short of a solar year, approximately 365 days, by about 11 days, the calendar would drift relative to seasons unless corrected. The Sumerians periodically inserted an extra month, an intercalary month, to realign the lunar calendar with the solar year and agricultural seasons. This adjustment was determined by priests observing celestial and agricultural signs. Death and the afterlife were areas of particular religious concern. When someone died, the body was usually buried beneath the house floor or in cemeteries outside the city. Grave goods, pottery vessels containing food and drink, personal items, sometimes valuable objects, were buried with the dead to sustain them in the afterlife. The afterlife itself was not appealing in Sumerian belief. The dead went to the underworld, a dark, dusty realm beneath the earth ruled by the goddess Ereshkigal. There was no moral judgment, everyone went to the same place regardless of how they lived. The underworld was described as a place where the dead drink dust and eat clay, existing as pale shadows of their former selves. The only variation was that those who died in battle or had proper burials might fare slightly better than those who died of disease or were unburied, and those who had many children to make offerings to them might receive more sustenance. This grim view of death made earthly life all the more precious. The Epic of Gilgamesh, in its later Babylonian version, expresses this worldview powerfully. After failing to achieve immortality, Gilgamesh is told by the barmaid Siduri, "Gilgamesh, whither are you wandering? Life, which you look for, you will never find. For when the gods created man, they let death be his share, and life withheld in their own hands. Gilgamesh, fill your belly day and night, make merry, let days be full of joy, dance and make music day and night. And wear fresh clothes, and wash your head and bathe. Look at the child that is holding your hand, and let your wife delight in your embrace. These things alone are the concern of men." This philosophy, that death is inevitable, so one should enjoy earthly life, find meaning in relationships, build things that endure, and accept mortality, pervades Sumerian thought. The gods were immortal, but humans were not, and that fundamental difference defined the human condition. Yet within this acceptance of mortality, Sumerians found meaning and purpose. They served the gods through their labor and worship. They contributed to maintaining cosmic order. They created beauty through art, literature, and crafts. They raised children who would continue after them. They built temples, cities, and canals that would endure. They lived, loved, worked, and found joy in the life they had, knowing it was finite but still valuable. As evening descended on Uruk and families gathered on rooftops, as temple lamps were lit before divine statues, as priests performed evening rituals, as parents told children stories of the gods, the divine and human realms interpenetrated. The gods were everywhere, in the stars above, in the water flowing through canals, in the grain growing in fields, in the children playing, in the love between spouses, in every moment of life. To be human in ancient Sumer was to live in a world alive with divine presence, where every action had religious significance, and where the boundary between earthly and sacred was permeable and constantly crossed. Chapter 6. Hands that shape the world. The great achievements of Sumerian civilization, the cities, temples, canals, literature, art, were created by human hands performing countless hours of skilled labor. Let us spend time with the craftspeople, artisans, and workers whose daily labor built and maintained this ancient world. In a potter's workshop in the artisan quarter of Uruk, a man named Puzur sat at his potter's wheel as morning light filtered through the doorway. His workshop was a courtyard attached to his house, where he, his two grown sons, and several apprentices produced the pottery vessels that were essential to daily life: jars for storing grain, oil, and water, bowls for eating, cups for drinking beer, cooking pots, oil lamps, and countless other forms. The potter's wheel had revolutionized ceramic production when it was invented centuries earlier. Puzur wheel was simple, a heavy stone disc that could be turned by an assistant while he shaped clay on its surface. As the wheel spun, his hands, calloused from decades of work, clay-stained and strong, shaped the spinning clay with remarkable speed and precision. A skilled potter could produce dozens of vessels in a day. His workshop included several kilns, domed structures of brick where finished pots were fired. Firing transformed soft clay into hard ceramic that could hold water, withstand heat, and last for years. The process required skill and experience, stacking pots in the kiln without them touching, building the fire slowly to dry pots without cracking them, achieving the right temperature for proper firing, and cooling the kiln gradually to prevent thermal shock. Different clays produced different colors and properties. Puzur knew which clay deposits near the city produced the finest vessels, which clays needed tempering with sand or straw to prevent cracking, and how to mix clays to achieve desired characteristics. This knowledge had been accumulated over generations and was passed from master to apprentice through years of training. The pots themselves told stories through their decoration. Some were left plain, purely functional vessels. Others were painted with geometric designs, zigzags, crosshatching, bands of color. Special commission pieces might feature more elaborate decoration, stylized animals, plants, or even narrative scenes. A pot might be functional art, beautiful and useful simultaneously. Pusermama's products were sold in the market and also supplied to the temple, which purchased large quantities of pottery for storing rations distributed to workers. Some pots were exported. Uruk pottery has been found at sites hundreds of kilometers away, evidence of long-distance trade networks. The potter was connected to the broader economy through his craft, his work enabling other economic activities. Nearby, in a textile workshop, dozens of women labored at looms or with spindles. Textile production was a major Sumerian industry, employing thousands of workers, mostly women, and producing cloth that was both used locally and exported throughout the ancient Near East. Mesopotamian textiles were prized for their quality and were major trade goods. The process began with raw wool from sheep. Southern Mesopotamia's economy was heavily dependent on sheep herding. Tens of thousands of sheep were owned by temples and palaces, maintained primarily for wool production, though also providing meat, milk, and leather. The wool was washed, combed, and prepared for spinning. Women used drop spindles, simple tools consisting of a stick with a weight attached, to spin wool fibers into thread. Spinning was tedious work requiring steady hands and constant attention, but it could be done anywhere, so women spun while watching children, talking with neighbors, or walking. Vast quantities of thread were needed for Sumer's textile production, so spinning occupied countless hours of women's labor. The thread was then woven into cloth on looms. Sumerian looms were vertical frames where warp threads, the vertical threads, were held taut while weft threads, the horizontal threads, were woven through them. Weaving required skill, strength, and precision. A weaver had to maintain consistent tension, create even patterns, and work for hours in uncomfortable positions. But skilled weavers could create beautiful textiles with complex patterns and designs. The finished cloth might be left natural or dyed. Dyes came from various sources: plants, madder for red, woad for blue, saffron for yellow, minerals, and shellfish. Dyeing was specialized skilled work, requiring knowledge of mordants, substances that fix dyes to fabric, proper dye concentrations, and techniques for achieving even colors. The finest textiles were made from linen, woven from flax fibers, rather than wool. Linen was cooler in the heat and was preferred for summer clothing by those who could afford it. The priests wore linen for ritual purposes, as linen was considered purer than wool, which came from animals that might be unclean. In a metal working shop, craftsmen worked with copper and bronze, creating tools, weapons, and prestige objects. Metallurgy had advanced significantly by the early dynastic period, though metal remained expensive and was used primarily for items where stone couldn't suffice, weapons that needed sharp edges, tools that required durability, and ornamental objects that displayed wealth. The metal workers imported copper ore from mines in Anatolia, Iran, or Oman. Copper sources were absent from southern Mesopotamia, then smelted the ore in furnaces to extract pure copper. They learned to create bronze by alloying copper with tin or arsenic, producing a harder metal suitable for weapons and tools. The creation of bronze required sophisticated knowledge of metallurgy, understanding melting temperatures, alloy proportions, and working techniques. Casting metal objects required creating molds, usually from clay or stone, into which molten metal was poured. Lost wax casting, where a wax model was covered in clay, the wax melted out, and metal poured into the resulting cavity, allowed creation of complex shapes and detailed ornamentation. Finished objects were hammered, filed, and polished to achieve desired shapes and surfaces. The metal workers produced weapons, copper or bronze axes, daggers, spearheads, and arrowheads. Metal weapons gave military advantages over enemies equipped with stone weapons, though bronze was expensive enough that not all warriors could be fully equipped with metal arms. Tools: axes for woodworking, hoes and sickles for agriculture, chisels for stone carving, needles for sewing, fishhooks, and various other implements. Metal tools were more efficient than stone and could be resharpened when dulled. Vessels, bowls, cups, and containers made of hammered copper. These were prestige objects, displaying wealth and status, as metal vessels were far more expensive than pottery. Jewelry, rings, bracelets, necklaces, pins, and earrings made from copper, bronze, silver, and gold, though silver and gold were rarer and more expensive. Jewelry served aesthetic and social functions, displaying wealth, status, and taste. Some jewelry had religious or protective significance, with amulets and symbols of gods. Decorative objects, statues, plaques, inlays for furniture and instruments, and various ornamental items for temples and wealthy homes. In another workshop, stone carvers worked on sculptures and cylinder seals. Southern Mesopotamia lacked stone, so all stone had to be imported from mountains to the north and east: limestone, alabaster, diorite, and other types suitable for carving. Imported stone was expensive, so stone carving produced valuable objects. Sculptors created votive statues, representations of worshippers placed in temples to offer perpetual prayer. These statues followed artistic conventions: large, staring eyes, to gaze upon the deity, hands clasped at chest in prayer position, and simplified, stylized bodies. Yet within these conventions, sculptors achieved remarkable individuality in faces, suggesting portraits of actual people. Cylinder seals were miniature masterpieces. These small stone cylinders, usually only 2 to 4 centimeters long, were carved with intaglio, reverse, designs. When rolled across wet clay, they left a positive impression, a raised relief image. Each seal was unique, serving as a personal signature or identification mark. Seal impressions authenticated documents, marked ownership of goods, and identified individuals in contracts. The imagery on cylinder seals is a rich source for understanding Sumerian culture. Common motifs included mythological scenes, gods fighting monsters, heroes battling lions or bulls, processional scenes with deities and worshippers. These images illustrated myths and religious beliefs. Contest scenes, stylized depictions of heroes or animals in combat, often showing a bearded hero or a half-human bullman fighting lions or other beasts. The meaning of these scenes is debated. They may represent cosmic conflicts between order and chaos. Banquet scenes, showing figures seated at feasts, being served by attendants, with food and drink displayed. These might represent earthly feasting or divine banquets. Agricultural and pastoral scenes, depicting farming, herding, or craft activities. These images of daily life provide valuable information about Sumerian economy and technology. Carving these tiny detailed scenes required extraordinary skill, patience, and steady hands. Carvers used drills, chisels, and abrasives to work the hard stone, creating images only a few centimeters across but containing remarkable detail and artistry. In households throughout the city, women engaged in craft production that was essential to daily life but often invisible in historical records. They ground grain into flour using saddle querns, flat stones on which grain was ground using a handheld grinding stone. This was backbreaking work. Skeletal remains of ancient women show where patterns on knees and spines from hours spent kneeling and grinding. Yet it had to be done daily, as flour couldn't be stored long without spoiling. They prepared food, cleaning vegetables, slaughtering and butchering animals, when meat was available, cooking in clay ovens or over open fires, brewing beer in large jars, processing dairy products, preserving foods through drying or salting, and countless other tasks required to feed families. They maintained the household, fetching water from canals, cleaning living spaces, washing clothes and linens, repairing textiles when they wore, making and mending baskets, mats, and other household goods. They cared for children, bearing them, a dangerous process before modern medicine, nursing them, training them, teaching girls domestic skills and boys basic skills before they went to apprenticeships or schooling. This domestic labor was essential to civilization's functioning. Without someone preparing food, maintaining homes, and raising children, no cities could exist, no temples could be built, no arts could flourish. Yet this work was generally unrecorded in texts, which focus on temple administration, royal projects, and the activities of men in public roles. We must remember that behind every monument, every great achievement, were countless unnamed women whose daily labor made civilization possible. Laborers whose work was recorded in administrative texts were those employed by temples and palaces. Thousands of workers labored on temple estates, farming fields, tending livestock, manufacturing textiles, processing agricultural products, constructing buildings, digging canals, and performing countless other tasks. These workers received rations rather than wages, measured amounts of grain, barley, primarily oil, usually sesame oil, and occasionally wool, fish, or other goods. Ration levels were calculated according to gender, age, and work category. Adult men performing heavy labor received the highest rations, perhaps 60 sila of barley per month, about 60 liters. Adult women received somewhat less, reflecting both gender discrimination and the assumption that women did lighter work. Children received reduced rations according to age. Skilled workers might receive supplemental rations or higher quality foods. These workers had limited freedom. They were assigned tasks by supervisors, worked according to set schedules, and were tracked through the administrative bureaucracy. Texts record workers by name, profession, and ration allocation. If workers failed to meet production quotas, harvest amounts, textile quantities, building projects, their rations might be reduced as punishment. This was a highly controlled, regimented labor system that enabled temples to manage vast enterprises but at significant cost to individual autonomy. Yet even within these constraints, workers were not mere automatons. They formed relationships, communities, and identities. They sang work songs that coordinated labor and made tedious tasks more bearable. They celebrated festivals together. They looked after each other's children. They developed pride in skilled work and crafts. They found moments of beauty and meaning in daily routines. As evening approached and workers returned from fields and workshops, as potters cleaned their wheels and metalworkers banked their furnaces, as weavers rolled up their work for the day, the city of Uruk settled into evening routines. The products of all this labor, pots and textiles, tools and jewelry, sculptures and seals, were the material culture that made Sumerian civilization possible. But more than that, the labor itself, the skill, creativity, and dedication of countless craftspeople was a form of civilization, a way that humans shaped the world and found meaning through their work. Chapter 7. Twilight, Peace descends. As the sun descended toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across Uruk, the fierce heat of the day finally broke. This was the moment Sumerians had waited for, when the city could breathe again, when life could be lived comfortably outdoors, when the beauty of the desert evening revealed itself. The light itself changed character. The harsh white glare of midday softened into golden amber, then into deeper orange and pink as the sun approached the horizon. The mud brick city, which had appeared bleached and monochromatic at midday, now glowed with warm colors. The whitewashed temple walls caught the light dramatically, appearing to glow from within. In the fields beyond the city walls, farmers completed their day's work. A man named Shara straightened from his labor, feeling the ache in his back that came from hours bent over crops. He had spent the day tending barley fields on the temple estate where he worked. The harvest would come soon. Already the grain was turning golden. But there was still work, checking irrigation channels, pulling weeds, driving birds away from ripening grain. Now, as evening approached, he walked toward the city along a dirt path beside an irrigation canal. The water flowed steadily in the canal, the sound was calming after the day's heat and toil. Small fish darted in the water. Reed beds along the canal bank swayed in the evening breeze. The landscape was green along the canal but brown beyond where irrigation didn't reach, a stark reminder of water's importance. Other farmers walked the same path, returning to the city. They called greetings to each other, exchanged news about their fields, discussed the upcoming harvest. Despite the hierarchy of Sumerian society, the rulers and priests at top, farmers somewhere in the middle, laborers and slaves at the bottom, there was also community and mutual recognition among those who shared similar work and lives. Shara passed through one of Uruk's gates, built into the massive walls that surrounded the city. Guards were stationed at the gate, but they knew the local farmers and waved them through with minimal scrutiny. The walls served multiple purposes: defense against enemies, flood protection, and psychological boundary between the ordered city and the wildlands beyond. Inside the city, the streets were coming alive with evening activity. Children who had been confined indoors during the hottest hours now poured out to play. Their voices echoed through narrow streets, calling, laughing, arguing over games. They played with toy animals made of clay, rolled hoops, threw balls, and played counting and hiding games that children have played across all cultures and times. Merchants opened stalls for evening trading. During the day, the market had been quiet, too hot for customers to browse comfortably. But now people came out to shop, to see what was available, to haggle over prices, and to gather information and gossip. Market stalls displayed their wares: fresh vegetables from gardens outside the city, dried fish from the marshes, dates from palm groves, beer from brewers, bread from bakers, textiles and baskets and pottery, and countless other goods. The transactions themselves were usually through barter or credit rather than coin money. Coinage wouldn't be invented until much later. Instead, people exchanged goods: barley for dates, fish for pottery, labor for food. Or they established credit relationships: I'll give you this basket of dates now, and you'll pay me back after harvest with grain. These credit relationships required trust and were often based on long-term relationships between trading partners. Silver was used as a standard of value and for major transactions, but it was too valuable for everyday purchases. Administrative texts record prices in silver shekels, about 8.4 grams, but actual payment might be made in goods valued at the equivalent silver amount. A worker's monthly ration of barley was worth perhaps 1/10 of a shekel of silver. A sheep might be worth 1 shekel. A slave might cost 10 to 20 shekels. A house in the city could be worth hundreds of shekels. In the beer houses, the evening crowd was gathering. Beer houses were important social institutions, meeting places where people drank, socialized, conducted business, and exchanged news. They were usually run by women, and Sumerian law codes had numerous provisions regulating them. Inside one such establishment, wooden benches lined the walls of a covered courtyard. Large jars of beer stood in corners, their contents accessed through reed drinking straws. A group of merchants sat together, discussing a proposed trading expedition to the north. They needed to pool resources, hire guards, arrange for pack animals, and determine what goods to take and what to bring back. Such partnerships were risky but potentially lucrative. At another table, older men played a board game similar to backgammon, moving pieces across a board marked with squares, throwing knuckle bones, small sheep bones, as dice. Gambling was common, though priests and lawmakers disapproved. The men drank beer, joked, and argued about game moves with the passionate intensity of those who have played the same game for decades. A singer sat in one corner, performing songs accompanied by a small lyre. The songs were traditional, about great heroes, about lost loves, about the hardships of farming, about the beauty of the goddess Inanna. People half listened while drinking and talking, but occasionally a particularly good performance would create quiet as the audience paid full attention. Elsewhere in the city, more private gatherings occurred. In the home of a wealthy merchant, a dinner party was underway. The host, Uarnamo, sharing a name with several kings, it was a popular name, had invited business associates and friends for an evening meal. They reclined on cushions in the courtyard, lit by oil lamps and a small fire. The meal was more elaborate than ordinary fare: multiple types of bread, roasted lamb, fish cooked with onions and dates, vegetables cooked in sesame oil, date cakes sweetened with honey, and both beer and imported wine. Wine, made from grapes grown in northern Mesopotamia or Syria, was expensive and prestigious. Serving wine demonstrated wealth and connections. The conversation ranged across many topics: the political situation, there were rumors of tensions with Kish, a powerful city to the north, agricultural prospects for the coming year, news from trading partners in distant cities, marriages being arranged, temple construction projects, and countless other matters. Such gatherings were where information circulated among the elite, where business relationships were strengthened, and where informal power networks operated. In the scribal quarter, Uruk, the young scribe we met in the morning, had returned for evening instruction. The tablet house operated in shifts: morning instruction for younger students, evening for more advanced students and specialized training. Tonight's lesson involved writing contracts. The headmaster dictated a standard contract formula, and students inscribed it on practice tablets. Uruk has rented from Ursin a field measuring 3 iku, located in the district of the White Temple, for a period of 1 year. The rent shall be 900 sila of barley, to be paid at harvest time. If Uruk fails to pay the rent, he shall pay an additional 100 sila as penalty. Witnessed by Lugalingar and Nanakalig on the 15th day of the month of barley harvest. Learning to write contracts was essential for scribal work. Most clay tablets produced in ancient Sumer were economic and legal documents: sales, rentals, loans, receipts, wages, rations, tax records. Scribes needed to master standard formulas, legal terminology, and precise wording. A poorly written contract could lead to disputes and litigation. As the students practiced, their reed styluses made soft pressing sounds against the clay, a sound that had echoed through scribal schools for centuries and would continue for thousands of years more. Each wedge-shaped mark they pressed into the clay was part of the vast written record of Sumerian civilization, the tens of thousands of tablets that document daily life, economic transactions, religious rituals, literary traditions, and administrative operations of humanity's first urban civilization. In the temple complexes, evening rituals continued. We can follow a young priest named Namtarenki as he participated in the evening service at the Iana temple. He had entered temple service as a boy, beginning as a simple acolyte doing menial tasks, gradually advancing through years of training to become a full priest eligible to perform important rituals. This evening's ritual was the presentation of the evening meal to Inanna. Namtarenki and several other priests prepared the offering tables, arranging foods artistically: bread in neat stacks, dates in bowls, roasted lamb on platters, beer in silver cups, and various other delicacies. Everything had to be perfect. The goddess demanded beauty in her service. They proceeded into the sanctuary, a dark chamber lit only by oil lamps. The statue of Inanna stood against the back wall, a life-sized female figure made of wood covered with gold leaf, dressed in elaborate clothes, adorned with jewelry. Her eyes, made of shell and lapis lazuli, seemed to follow the priests as they approached. Namtarenki felt the familiar mixture of awe and routine that came from years of performing these rituals. The goddess was simultaneously terrifying and familiar, remote and intimate. He believed she was present, inhabiting this statue, watching him. Yet he had performed this ritual hundreds of times and knew every movement by heart. They chanted hymns as they placed the food before the goddess. Inanna, Lady of Heaven, whose praise is sweet, I bow before you in your holy chamber. Accept these offerings from your devoted servants. Grant us your favor, protect your city, bring prosperity to Uruk, abundance to your people. The hymn continued with elaborate praises of Inanna's beauty, power, and benevolence. After the presentation, they stood in silent prayer briefly, then backed out of the sanctuary, closing the heavy doors. The goddess would consume the offerings through the night. In the morning, the physical food would be redistributed to temple staff. The divine essence had been consumed even though the physical substance remained. Outside the sanctuary, the temple complex bustled with activity. Priests, scribes, administrators, craftspeople, and workers moved about their various tasks. The temple was never quiet, never closed. It operated continuously, a hive of economic and religious activity that never truly slept. Across the city, as full darkness fell, families prepared for sleep. On their roof, Nanakalig's family lay on their mats, looking up at the emerging stars. The grandmother, as she had done for thousands of nights across her long life, traced the constellations and told their stories. There, she pointed, is the hired man. See how his sickle is raised? He harvests the stars themselves. And there is the bull of heaven, whose snorting causes the earth to shake. Inanna once set that bull upon the hero Gilgamesh, but Gilgamesh and his friend Enkidu slew it, earning the god's anger. The children listened drowsily, half asleep, the stories washing over them like a familiar lullaby. They had heard these tales countless times, but they never tired of them. The stories connected them to the ancient past, to the gods, to the eternal patterns written in the stars. The youngest child asked, "Grandmother, will I see Inanna someday?" The old woman smiled. "Perhaps, child. The gods walk among us, though usually invisible. But sometimes, they say, you might see a figure of impossible beauty walking through the city at dawn or dusk, and you'll know you've seen a god. Or you might feel suddenly filled with courage or love or inspiration, and that's the god touching your heart. The gods are everywhere, always watching, always present." The child fell asleep with that thought, dreaming perhaps of divine encounters, of temples and ziggurats, of the goddess walking through Uruk streets, beautiful and terrible and glorious. Across the city, thousands of other families were similarly settling for sleep. Tens of thousands of people, their lives intertwined through economics, religion, kinship, and shared urban existence. Each person with their own dreams, hopes, fears, and stories. Each life unique yet part of this greater collective called civilization. The city itself seemed to sigh as it settled into night. The sounds diminished to soft murmurs, distant conversations, a baby crying, dogs barking, the eternal flow of water through canals. The darkness was profound, there was no street lighting, no electric glow. The city at night was lit only by moonlight, when the moon was up, starlight, and the occasional oil lamp visible through a window or doorway. In this darkness, the temples stood out dramatically. Their platforms elevated them above the surrounding city, and lamps burning on their terraces and before divine statues made them appear as islands of light in the darkness. The white temple atop its ziggurat, its walls reflecting lamplight, seemed to float above the city, connecting earth and heaven, a beacon visible for kilometers across the flat Mesopotamian plain. This was the daily rhythm of Sumerian life, the hard work of morning and afternoon, the relief and social activity of evening, the peaceful descent into night. Tomorrow the cycle would repeat, the morning star rising, water being drawn, work beginning, the sun climbing, heat intensifying, midday rest, afternoon activity, evening gathering, nighttime peace. Day after day, year after year, generation after generation. The rivers would continue to flow from the distant mountains through the city and fields and on to the sea. The seasons would turn at summer heat yielding to autumn mildness, winter rains, slight though they were in the south, spring warmth and floods, then summer heat again. The agricultural calendar would govern the rhythm of years, planting, growing, harvest, storage, planting again. Through all this, the cities endured. Buildings crumbled and were rebuilt. Rulers rose and fell. Disputes flared and were resolved. Life continued, this great human experiment in urban living, in civilization, in creating complex societies where thousands of people lived together, where specialization enabled achievements impossible for scattered villages, where writing preserved knowledge across generations, where art and literature flourished, where religion gave meaning and purpose, where human creativity found expression in countless ways. And so we come to the end of our evening in ancient Uruk, our quiet journey through a day in humanity's first civilization. The city sleeps now, as it has slept for over 4,000 years since the last Sumerians walked its streets. The temples are ruins, the canals filled with sand, the voices silent. But for a few hours, we have walked those streets, drawn water from those canals, heard those voices. We have listened to the rhythm of Sumerian days, the morning awakening, the afternoon heat, the blessed evening relief. We have met farmers and scribes, potters and priests, children playing and elders telling stories. We have seen how people lived, worked, worshipped, and found meaning in the world's first cities. What can we take from this journey? What lessons or insights might ancient Sumer offer us, separated as we are by over 4 millennia? Perhaps first is simply a sense of connection. The Sumerians were different from us in many ways. Their language, religion, technology, and social structures were utterly foreign to our modern world. Yet they were fundamentally human in all the ways that matter. They loved their children and worried about their welfare. They enjoyed gathering with friends and family in the cool of evening. They found satisfaction in skilled work well done. They sought meaning in religious belief and practice. They told stories, made music, and created beauty. They faced the same fundamental human questions we face: how should I live? What is my purpose? How do I make sense of mortality? Across the vast gulf of time, we can recognize ourselves in them. And in recognizing their humanity, perhaps we become more aware of our own humanity, our connection to the long human story that stretches from the first farmers planting seeds 10,000 years ago to the present moment. Second, we might gain perspective on civilization itself. We live in cities, use writing, follow laws, and participate in complex economic and political systems. These things seem natural and inevitable to us. But they weren't always so. Someone had to invent writing. Someone had to figure out how to organize urban life. Someone had to develop legal systems, administrative bureaucracies, architectural techniques, and all the other infrastructure of civilization. The Sumerians were pioneers in all these domains. They weren't given instructions or models, they figured it out through trial and error, generation by generation, building on what came before and adding innovations. Civilization wasn't inevitable or natural but was created by human ingenuity, creativity, and hard work. Recognizing this helps us appreciate both how remarkable civilization is and how fragile it can be. Third, we might reflect on what we've gained and lost in the millennia since Sumer. We've gained tremendously in technology, knowledge, health, and material prosperity. A modern person enjoys comforts and capabilities the ancient Sumerians couldn't imagine. Yet we might also wonder whether we've lost something, perhaps a sense of connection to nature's rhythms, or to the sacred, or to community, or to the satisfaction of skilled manual labor. The Sumerians lived in a world where the divine was immanent, where gods were present in every aspect of life. For good or ill, they inhabited a world alive with meaning and spiritual significance. They lived by the rhythms of sun and water, agriculture and seasons, in ways most modern urban dwellers don't. They worked with their hands, creating tangible objects through skilled labor. They lived in close-knit communities where everyone knew everyone, for better and worse. We cannot and should not romanticize the ancient world. Life was hard, short, and often cruel by our standards. But we might ask what aspects of ancient life held value that we've lost, and whether we might recover some of that value in our own lives. As we close this episode, imagine once more that Sumerian evening. The sun has set. The stars are emerging. Families lie on rooftops throughout Uruk, settling into sleep. The temple lamps glow in the darkness. The water flows eternally through canals. A night bird calls. Somewhere a child murmurs in their sleep. An old woman breathes her last, peacefully, surrounded by family. A baby is born, crying out into the ancient night. Life continues, the great cycle of birth and death, of work and rest, of day and night, of seasons turning. The people of that evening, every single one of them, are dust now. Their dreams, hopes, fears, and loves are gone, leaving only faint traces in clay tablets and archaeological remains. Yet in another sense, they endure. Their innovations, writing, mathematics, law, literature, architecture, shape our world still. Their struggles, achievements, and daily lives are part of our human heritage. We are their inheritors, carrying forward the civilization they began. And perhaps most importantly, their simple human moments, a mother singing to a child, friends sharing beer and stories, lovers meeting in the cool of evening, an old person watching the stars with satisfaction, these moments echo across the millennia. For in the most important ways, human life hasn't changed. We still love, fear, hope, and wonder. We still seek meaning, connection, and beauty. We still face the mystery of existence with courage and creativity. The rivers still flow in Iraq, the Tigris and Euphrates, though diminished from ancient times, still carry water from the mountains to the sea. The stars still shine above the desert as they shone on Sumerian astronomers 5,000 years ago. The human heart still beats with the same rhythms of joy and sorrow, hope and fear, love and loss. Thank you for joining us on this peaceful journey through ancient Sumer. We hope this intimate exploration of daily life in humanity's first civilization has brought you not just historical knowledge but also contemplation, connection, and perhaps a different perspective on your own life and time. If you found peace and value in this episode, please consider subscribing to our channel, sharing it with others who appreciate contemplative explorations of history, and supporting our work through the links below. Your support enables us to continue creating these quiet journeys through time. In our next episode, we'll travel to another ancient world, exploring another chapter in humanity's long story. Until then, we wish you peaceful evenings, satisfying work, deep connections, and the wisdom to appreciate the ordinary extraordinary moments of your own life, for you too are part of the great human story, your moments as precious as any that occurred in ancient Uruk. Sleep well, and may your dreams carry you to ancient cities, to temple courtyards in evening light, to the sound of water flowing through canals, to rooftops under stars, to all the quiet moments where the human and the eternal meet.